The hawk's blood stained Willa's apron crimson as she cradled the wounded bird against her chest, running through the dusty streets of Gonzales, Texas, while the late afternoon sun of July 1878 beat down mercilessly on her dark hair. She had found the red-tailed hawk, tangled in barbed wire behind the general store where she worked, its wing torn and twisted at an angle that made her stomach clench with sympathetic pain. The bird had stopped fighting by the time she carefully freed it from the cruel metal, its amber eyes glazing with shock and blood loss. And something in those eyes reminded her of her own desperation when her parents had died of cholera 3 years ago, leaving her alone in this unforgiving Texas town at the age of 19. Her small room above the bakery was stifling in the summer heat, but Willa barely noticed as she laid the hawk gently on an old blanket spread across her narrow bed. She had learned about healing from her mother, who had been the closest thing Gonzales had to a proper doctor before the fever took her. Willa's hands moved with practiced certainty as she fetched clean water from the pitcher on her washstand, tore strips from an already threadbare sheet, and examined the hawk's injuries more closely. The wing was badly damaged, possibly broken, and there were several deep cuts where the barbed wire had sliced through feathers and flesh. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice low and soothing as she began to clean the wounds. The hawk remained still, either too weak to struggle or sensing somehow that she meant to help. Willa worked carefully, her fingers gentle but efficient as she removed dirt and debris from the cuts. She had some whiskey that old Mr. Henderson had given her last Christmas, and though she rarely touched it herself, she used it now to disinfect the wounds, wincing in sympathy as the hawk's body tensed with pain. Setting the wing was the hardest part. Willa had helped her mother set broken arms and legs on people, but a bird's wing was different, more delicate and complex. She studied the wing carefully, feeling along the bones until she found the break, then took a deep breath and pulled gently but firmly until she felt the bones align. The hawk made a sharp, keening sound that cut through her heart, but she forced herself to continue, splinting the wing with thin pieces of wood from a broken picture frame and wrapping it securely with strips of cloth. By the time she finished, darkness had fallen outside her single window, and her hands were shaking from exhaustion and nervous tension. The hawk lay quiet now, its breathing shallow but steady, and Willa carefully moved it to a wooden crate she had lined with soft rags. She set the crate near the window where air could circulate, then sank onto her bed and allowed herself a moment of doubt. What if the wing did not heal properly? What if the hawk died despite her efforts? She had acted on instinct and compassion, but now the weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. The next morning, Willa woke before dawn and immediately checked on the hawk. To her relief, the bird was still alive, its eyes more alert than they had been the night before. She offered it water from a small dish, and after a moment's hesitation, the hawk drank. Encouraged, Willa hurried downstairs to the bakery where she worked and begged some scraps of raw meat from Mrs. Chen, the baker's wife, claiming she was feeding a stray cat. Mrs. Chen, who had a soft heart beneath her stern exterior, gave her several pieces without asking too many questions. The hawk ate eagerly, tearing at the meat with its sharp beak, and Willa felt a surge of hope. If the bird was eating, it had a fighting chance. She changed the bandages on its wounds, checking for signs of infection, and was relieved to see that everything looked clean. The hawk watched her with those piercing amber eyes, and she found herself talking to it as she worked, telling it about her day ahead, about the customers who would come into the general store, about the heat that was already building even at this early hour. Days turned into weeks, and Willa fell into a routine of caring for the hawk before and after her long shifts at the store. She named him Ranger, though she was not entirely certain of the bird's sex, and the hawk seemed to respond to her voice, growing calmer when she entered the room and even making soft chirping sounds when she brought food. The wounds healed cleanly, the cuts closing into pink scars beneath the feathers, but the wing remained splinted, and Willa worried constantly about whether it would heal strong enough for flight. The general store where Willa worked was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, a middle-aged couple who had always been kind to her. Mrs. Patterson had helped arrange her room above the bakery after her parents died, and Mr. Patterson had given her the job at the store when she needed income. They paid her fairly and treated her with respect, which was more than many young women alone in the world could say. Willa was grateful for their kindness, but she was also aware that gratitude did not fill the hollow loneliness that sometimes threatened to swallow her whole. It was a Friday morning in early August when the cowboy walked into the store. Willa was arranging cans of beans on a shelf when the door opened with the jangle of the bell, and she turned to greet the customer with her usual polite smile. The smile faltered slightly when she saw him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days working under the Texas sky. His hat was dusty and well-worn, his clothes practical and travel-stained, and when he removed his hat as he entered, she saw dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and eyes the color of storm clouds, a deep gray that seemed to take in everything at once. "Morning, miss," he said, his voice a deep rumble with the slow drawl of Texas. "I am looking for some supplies. I will be in the area for a few weeks, working at the Murphy Ranch." "Of course," Willa replied, trying to ignore the way her heart had started beating faster. She had seen plenty of cowboys come through Gonzales, but there was something different about this one, something in the way he carried himself with quiet confidence, and the way his eyes met hers directly, without the presumption or dismissal she so often encountered. "What do you need?" He gave her a list, rattling off items with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. Coffee, flour, bacon, beans, tobacco. Willa moved through the store gathering everything, aware of his presence behind her, of the way he moved aside politely when she needed to pass, of the scent of leather and horse, and something clean that might have been soap. When she had everything gathered on the counter, he paid without haggling, counting out coins from a worn leather pouch. "Thank you, miss." He paused, clearly hoping she would supply her name. "Willa," she said, then added, "Willa Jenkins." "Wade Mitchell," he replied, and smiled for the first time. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, closer to her own age. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Jenkins." After he left, Willa found herself thinking about him at odd moments throughout the day, which irritated her. She had no time for foolish romantic notions. She had Ranger to care for, a job to maintain, and her own independence to protect. Men, in her experience, were unreliable at best and dangerous at worst. Her father had been loving but ultimately unable to save himself or his family from disease, and since his death, she had fended off enough unwanted advances from rough men to be wary of them all. But Wade Mitchell had been polite, respectful, and there had been something in his eyes, a hint of kindness or perhaps loneliness that echoed her own. That evening, as she was feeding Ranger and changing his bandages, she heard footsteps on the stairs leading to her room. She tensed, her hand moving instinctively toward the knife she kept by her bedside, but then Mrs. Patterson's voice called out, "Willa, dear, are you decent? There is someone here to see you." Confused and wary, Willa quickly draped a cloth over Ranger's crate, hiding the hawk from view, then opened her door. Mrs. Patterson stood on the landing, looking slightly flustered, and behind her was Wade Mitchell, his hat in his hands and an apologetic expression on his face. "I am sorry to disturb you, Miss Jenkins," he said quickly, before she could speak. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned that you live here, and I wanted to return this." He held out his hand, and Willa saw a small silver locket resting in his palm. Her hand flew to her throat, where the locket usually hung, and found only bare skin. "Oh," she breathed, taking the locket from him with trembling fingers. It had been her mother's, one of the few things she had left of her parents, and she must have lost it at the store. "Thank you." "Thank you so much. I did not even realize it was gone." "I found it on the floor by the counter," Wade explained. "I would have returned it earlier, but I had to get back to the ranch, and by the time I was done with my work, the store was closed. I hope I have not overstepped by coming here." "No, not at all," Willa assured him, clutching the locket tightly. "I am so grateful. This belonged to my mother." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of understanding and sympathy. "Then I am doubly glad I found it," he said quietly. Before Willa could respond, a sharp, high-pitched cry came from inside her room. Wade's head jerked up, his eyes widening. Was that a bird? Willa hesitated, torn between protecting her secret and trusting this man who had gone out of his way to return something precious to her. Mrs. Patterson looked equally curious, craning her neck to try to see into the room. Finally, Willa made a decision. "Yes," she admitted. "I have been caring for an injured hawk." "A hawk?" Wade's eyebrows rose, but he looked more interested than shocked. "May I see it?" Willa glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who shrugged and said, "I need to get back downstairs. The bread will be ready to come out of the oven soon. Good evening, Mr. Mitchell." She disappeared down the stairs, leaving Willa alone with Wade in the narrow hallway. After a moment's deliberation, Willa stepped back and gestured for Wade to enter. Her room was small and sparsely furnished, and she felt a flush of embarrassment at its bare simplicity, but Wade did not seem to notice or care. His attention was fixed on the crate by the window. Willa removed the cloth, revealing Ranger, who regarded the stranger with wary, unblinking eyes. "Well, I will be," Wade breathed, moving closer slowly, instinctively understanding not to startle the bird. "That is a red-tailed hawk. How did you come to have it?" Willa explained, telling him about finding Ranger caught in the barbed wire, about cleaning and splinting the wing, about the weeks of care and feeding. As she spoke, Wade listened intently, his eyes moving between her face and the hawk, and when she finished, he let out a low whistle. "That is remarkable," he said, shaking his head in what seemed like genuine admiration. "Most people would not have bothered or would not have known what to do. You saved its life." "I hope so," Willa replied, moving to kneel beside the crate. Ranger made a soft sound, recognizing her, and allowed her to stroke the feathers on his head. "The wing is healing, but I will not know if it is strong enough for flight until I remove the splint. I have been too afraid to try." Wade was quiet for a moment, studying the hawk's splinted wing with a practiced eye. "How long has it been?" "5 weeks now." "That should be long enough for the bone to mend," Wade said slowly. "I have set wings on chickens and once on an owl. Birds heal faster than people generally. But you are right to be cautious. If you take the splint off too soon and the wing is not healed, it could break again." "Have you worked with injured animals before?" Willa asked, looking up at him with new interest. Wade nodded, settling down on the floor near the crate with an ease that suggested he was comfortable in all kinds of situations. "My father ran a ranch in Oklahoma before he died. I grew up caring for animals, learning how to doctor them when they got hurt or sick. It was necessary when you are days away from any real veterinarian." His voice grew quieter, tinged with old grief. "I lost my parents 5 years ago, Comanche raid. I was away driving cattle to market." "I am sorry," Willa said softly, and meant it. She understood that particular kind of loss, the guilt that came with surviving when your loved ones did not. "Thank you," Wade replied, then seemed to shake off the sadness. "But that is the past. Right now, we have this fine hawk to think about. If you want, I could help you remove the splint and see how the wing looks. Between the two of us, we will have a better chance of holding him steady and keeping from causing more damage." Willa considered the offer. Every instinct told her to be cautious, not to trust too quickly, but there was something about Wade Mitchell that felt solid and genuine. And truthfully, she had been dreading the moment of removing the splint alone, terrified of hurting Ranger or discovering that her efforts had been in vain. "All right," she agreed, "but not tonight. I want to be fresh and calm when we do it, not tired from the day. Could you come back tomorrow evening?" "I would be glad to," Wade said, rising to his feet and offering her a hand to help her up. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but gentle, and Willa felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the contact. She released his hand quickly, disconcerted by her own reaction. Wade visited the next evening as promised, and this time Willa was prepared. She had fresh bandages ready in case the wing needed to be wrapped again, clean water, and a piece of cloth to use as a hood if Ranger became too agitated. Wade brought his own contributions, a small flask of whiskey for disinfecting, and a surprisingly gentle manner with the hawk. "Talk to him while I work," Willa instructed, carefully beginning to unwrap the splint. "Your voice is deeper than mine. It might soothe him." Wade did as she asked, speaking in a low, steady stream about the weather, the cattle he had been working with at the Murphy Ranch, a funny incident involving a stubborn horse. His voice was indeed soothing, and Ranger remained relatively calm as Willa removed the wooden splints and unwrapped the final layers of bandages. When the wing was finally free, she held her breath, examining it carefully. The bone had healed straight, as far as she could tell. The cuts had closed completely, leaving only thin scars. Willa gently extended the wing, watching for any sign of pain or abnormality, and Ranger tolerated the examination with only a slight protest. When she released the wing, the hawk folded it naturally against his body, not drooping or hanging at an odd angle. "It looks good," Wade said, his voice warm with approval. "You did excellent work, Willa." Hearing her given name from his lips sent another flutter through her stomach, but Willa forced herself to focus. "We will not know for certain until he tries to fly," she said practically, though she could not quite suppress a smile of relief and pride. Over the following week, Wade visited every evening after his work at the ranch. He never presumed or overstayed his welcome, but his presence became something Willa looked forward to with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. They exercised Ranger's wing together, gently extending and folding it to strengthen the muscles that had been immobilized for so long. Wade brought scraps of fresh meat from the ranch, better quality than what Willa had been able to provide, and Ranger grew stronger and more restless. During these evening visits, Willa and Wade talked, not just about the hawk but about their lives, their losses, their dreams. Willa learned that Wade had been drifting since his parents' deaths, working at different ranches, never staying long in one place. He was 24 years old, self-sufficient and skilled, but there was a loneliness in him that matched her own. "I keep thinking I should settle somewhere," Wade confessed one evening as they sat on the floor of Willa's room, watching Ranger preen his feathers. "Buy a piece of land, build something that lasts. But every time I start to put down roots, I get restless and move on. I do not know what I am looking for." "Maybe you will know it when you find it," Willa suggested, then added more quietly, I understand the feeling, though. I have stayed in Gonzales because I do not have anywhere else to go, but sometimes I feel like I am just existing, not really living. Wade turned to look at her, his gray eyes intense. You are doing more than existing, Willa. You saved that hawk's life. You work hard, you are kind, you have not let this world make you bitter even though you have every reason to be. That is living, even if it does not always feel like it. Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks, unused to such direct praise. You hardly know me, she protested weakly. I know enough, Wade replied simply, and the way he said it made her heart race. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and Willa found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something she could not name. But before anything could happen, Ranger squawked loudly and flapped his wings, breaking the spell. They both laughed, the tension easing into something comfortable again. 2 weeks after the splint came off, Willa and Wade agreed that it was time to try releasing Ranger. The hawk was clearly ready, beating his wings strongly whenever they exercised him, eating voraciously, and growing increasingly frustrated with his confinement. Willa felt a pang at the thought of losing him, but she knew that keeping a wild creature caged when it was capable of freedom would be cruel. They decided to make the attempt early on a Sunday morning when Willa had no work. Wade arrived at dawn, and together they carried Ranger's crate out of town to a wide, open field where the hawk would have plenty of space to fly without obstacles. The August morning was already warm, the sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds, and Willa's heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Are you ready? Wade asked, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder in a gesture of support. Willa nodded, not trusting her voice. She opened the crate, and Ranger hopped out onto the grass, looking around with evident interest. For a long moment, the hawk just stood there, as if unsure what to do with this unexpected freedom. Then, with a powerful thrust of his legs and a sweep of his wings, he launched himself into the air. Willa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Ranger wobbled slightly in the air, still adjusting to flight after so many weeks of being grounded, but his wings beat strongly and steadily. He climbed higher, circling once, twice, 3 times over the field, and Willa felt tears streaming down her face, not from sadness but from pure, overwhelming joy. He is flying, she breathed, laughing through her tears. Wade, look at him fly. Wade was grinning broadly, his eyes tracking the hawk's progress through the sky. You did that, he said, turning to her. You healed him. You have got a healing touch, Willa Jenkins. Ranger circled once more, and then, instead of flying away as Willa had expected, he descended, landing on a fence post about 20 feet away. He turned his head to look back at them, and Willa had the absurd feeling that the hawk was saying goodbye, acknowledging what she had done for him. Then, with a final cry that echoed across the field, Ranger spread his wings and flew off toward the distant tree line, growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared from view. Willa stood staring at the empty sky, feeling the loss and the rightness of it all at once. She had saved Ranger, healed him, given him back his life and his freedom. It was enough. It had to be enough. Willa, Wade said softly, and she turned to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. I have something I need to tell you. What is it? She asked, sudden fear gripping her. Was he leaving? Of course he was leaving. He had said himself that he never stayed in one place for long. I was supposed to move on next week, Wade said, confirming her fear. There is work at a ranch up near Austin, better pay, and I had already sent word that I would take the job. But I have been thinking, and I do not want to go, not if it means leaving you. Willa's heart seemed to stop, then start again at double speed. Wade. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, he continued, speaking quickly now as if afraid he would lose his nerve. And I know I have no right to presume anything. But these evenings with you, they have been the best part of my days. You are the best part of my days. When I am with you, I do not feel restless. I feel like I have found what I have been looking for all this time. I feel the same, Willa whispered, hardly daring to believe this was happening. But Wade, I have nothing. No family, no property, just a room above a bakery and a job that barely pays enough to survive. What kind of future could we have? Wade stepped closer, taking her hands in his. We will build one together. I have some money saved, enough to buy a small piece of land. We could start a ranch, raise horses or cattle. It would be hard work, but we would be together. Unless, he hesitated, suddenly uncertain, unless you do not want that, I will understand if you do not feel the same way. I do feel the same way, Willa said, her voice stronger now. I have been trying to protect myself, but I cannot help it. When you are near, everything feels brighter, more possible. I look forward to your visits all day. I think about you when I should be working. And yes, I want a future with you, Wade Mitchell. I want it more than I have wanted anything in a very long time. Wade's face lit up with such pure happiness that Willa felt her own heart swell in response. He pulled her close, and she went willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beating, rapid and strong, matching her own. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the middle of the empty field, and Willa felt something inside her that had been tightly closed begin to open. I should court you properly, Wade murmured into her hair. Take you to church socials, bring you flowers, ask your permission before I kiss you. Willa pulled back just enough to look up at him, a smile playing at her lips. I do not need flowers, she said. And as for permission to kiss me, you have it. Wade's eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her mouth. He cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks, and then he lowered his head and kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Willa pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, and the kiss deepened, becoming something fierce and tender all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Willa felt dizzy with emotion. I love you, Wade said, resting his forehead against hers. It is too soon, I know, but I do. I love you, Willa. I love you too, Willa replied, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. She did love him, this kind, strong man who had returned her mother's locket, who had helped her heal a wounded hawk, who saw her not as a charity case or a potential conquest, but as an equal, someone worthy of respect and affection. They walked back to town hand in hand, making plans as they went. Wade would speak to Mr. Murphy about leaving his employment, giving proper notice. Willa would talk to the Pattersons, thanking them for their kindness, but explaining that she was leaving. They would be married as soon as it could be arranged, then use Wade's savings to purchase land. It would not be easy, but they were both accustomed to hard work, and they would face the challenges together. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson were surprised by Willa's announcement, but ultimately supportive, with Mrs. Patterson insisting on making Willa's wedding dress, and Mr. Patterson offering to give her away since she had no family to do so. Wade found a piece of land for sale about 10 miles outside of Gonzales, 50 acres with a creek running through it, and good grazing for livestock. It was not much, but it was theirs, or it would be once they signed the papers. The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in late September, in the small church at the center of Gonzales. Willa wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had sewn with remarkable skill, and Wade wore his best suit, which he had purchased specially for the occasion. There were not many guests, just the Pattersons, Mrs. Chen from the bakery, a few people from the general store, and some of Wade's acquaintances from the Murphy ranch. But the ceremony was heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed Willa with such joy and tenderness that several people in the congregation sighed audibly. They spent their wedding night in the small house that came with their new property. It was hardly more than a cabin, really, just 2 rooms that needed significant repairs, but to Willa it felt like a palace. It was theirs, their home. Wade carried her over the threshold, making her laugh, and set her down gently in the main room, which served as both kitchen and living area. "It needs work," Wade acknowledged, looking around at the worn floorboards and the patches of daylight visible through gaps in the walls. "We will fix it," Willa said confidently, taking his hand. "Together." That night, as they lay together in the narrow bed that was the cabin's only piece of furniture, Willa felt a contentment she had never known. Wade held her close, his body warm against hers, and she traced idle patterns on his chest, marveling at the strange and wonderful turn her life had taken. "Do you ever think about Ranger?" Wade asked quietly into the darkness. "Yes," Willa admitted. "I wonder where he is, if he is all right." "He is all right," Wade said with certainty. "He is flying free, hunting, living the life he was meant to live, because you saved him. You have a gift, Willa. A healing touch. Maybe we should think about using it." "What do you mean?" Wade was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "People around here, they do not always have access to good medical care. The nearest real doctor is in San Antonio, and that is a hard journey. But you learned from your mother, and you have a natural talent. Maybe, once we get settled, you could let people know that you are willing to help with injuries and ailments, not as a replacement for a proper doctor, but as someone who can provide basic care." Willa considered this. The idea was both appealing and frightening. "I am not trained," she protested. "What if I make someone worse?" "You will not," Wade said firmly. "You will be careful and cautious, just like you were with Ranger, and I will help you however I can. We will learn together." Over the following months, Wade and Willa threw themselves into building their life together. They repaired the cabin, filling the gaps in the walls and replacing broken floorboards. Wade built new furniture, a proper table and chairs, shelves for storage, a larger bed. Willa planted a garden, growing vegetables and herbs that could be used for both cooking and medicine. They purchased a small herd of cattle, just 10 head to start with, and some chickens for eggs. Word spread slowly about Willa's healing touch. It started when a neighboring rancher's son cut his hand badly on a piece of metal, and the father, desperate and unable to make the journey to San Antonio, brought the boy to Willa. She cleaned and stitched the wound, then bandaged it carefully and instructed the father on how to watch for signs of infection. The hand healed cleanly, and the grateful father told everyone he knew about the young woman who had saved his son's hand, maybe even his life. After that, people came more regularly. A woman with a difficult cough that would not go away, a man who had been thrown from a horse and thought he might have cracked a rib, a child with a fever that terrified her parents. Willa helped them all, drawing on her mother's teachings and her own instincts, and more often than not, her patients recovered. She never charged much, accepting whatever people could afford to pay, whether that was coins or baked goods or help with work around the ranch. Wade supported her completely, often assisting with difficult cases and learning alongside her. He had a steady hand and a calm demeanor that helped keep patients comfortable, and together, they made an effective team. In the evenings, after the work was done and any patients had left, they would sit together on the porch they had built, watching the sun set over their land and talk about their day, their dreams, their love for each other. A year after their wedding, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually. A missed monthly course followed by another, waves of nausea in the mornings and a tenderness in her breasts that had not been there before. When she was finally certain, she waited for the right moment to tell Wade, wanting it to be special. She chose a Sunday evening when they were sitting on their porch, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun sank toward the horizon. Wade had his arm around her shoulders, and she was leaning against him, comfortable and content. "Wade," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." He looked down at her, instantly alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," she assured him quickly. "Better than fine, actually. Wade, I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Wade just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the chickens in their nearby coop. He swept Willa up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby. Willa, that is wonderful. That is the most wonderful thing I have ever heard." He set her down carefully, suddenly concerned. "Should I not have spun you like that? Is it safe? Are you feeling all right? Do you need to sit down?" Willa laughed at his instant transformation from exuberant to overprotective. "I am fine," she said again. "Pregnant women are not fragile, Wade. I can still work and live normally." "Even so," Wade said, taking her hand and leading her to the chair on the porch. "You should rest when you can. And you should not be lifting heavy things or working with patients who might have something contagious. We need to keep you and the baby safe." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Willa continued to see patients, though she followed Wade's advice and was more cautious about what cases she took on. Her belly grew round and firm, and she felt the baby move inside her, small flutters at first that grew into distinct kicks and turns. Wade was endlessly fascinated by the changes in her body, placing his hands on her belly to feel the baby kick, talking to the child as if it could already understand him. They did not know if the baby would be a boy or a girl, and they debated names endlessly. Wade wanted to name a son after his father, William, but Willa worried that having two people in the family with names starting with W would be confusing. They compromised, agreeing that if it was a boy, they would name him William and call him Billy to differentiate him from Wade. For a girl, they settled on Sarah, after Willa's mother. One evening in late spring, as Willa was entering her 8th month of pregnancy, a commotion outside drew their attention. Wade went to the door and found a young cowboy on horseback, his face pale and frightened. "Mr. Mitchell," the cowboy gasped, "you have got to help. There has been an accident at the Murphy ranch. A horse spooked and kicked Mr. Murphy in the head. He is bleeding something terrible, and we do not know what to do." Wade glanced back at Willa, torn. He did not want to leave her alone this late in her pregnancy, but people needed help. "Go," Willa said firmly. "I will be fine here. Take the medical supplies and do what you can for Mr. Murphy." "Are you certain?" Wade asked, already reaching for the bag they kept packed with bandages, medicines, and tools. "I am certain. Go." Wade kissed her quickly, then swung up onto his horse and rode off into the gathering darkness with the young cowboy. Willa stood on the porch, watching until they disappeared from view, then went back inside. She tried to settle herself with mending, but her mind was on Wade and Mr. Murphy, praying that the injury was not as serious as it sounded. Hours passed. Willa dozed fitfully in her chair, starting awake at every small sound, hoping it was Wade returning. It was well past midnight when she finally heard hoofbeats approaching. She hurried to the door, awkward with her swollen belly, and relief flooded through her when she saw Wade dismounting. "How is Mr. Murphy?" she called as he approached. Wade's expression was grave as he climbed the porch steps. "He will live, but it was close. The kick fractured his skull and he lost a lot of blood. I cleaned the wound and stitched it as best I could, but he needs a real doctor. They are taking him to San Antonio at first light." "You did what you could," Willa said, taking his hands. They were still stained with blood and she could see the exhaustion in his face. "Come inside. Let me heat some water so you can wash." As Willa helped Wade clean up, he told her more about the accident, about the chaos at the ranch and the fear in Mrs. Murphy's eyes. "I kept thinking about what you would do," Wade said quietly. "How calm you always are with patients, how gentle but efficient. I tried to channel that." "You have learned well," Willa said, pressing a kiss to his temple. "Mr. Murphy is lucky you were available to help." A few days later, word came that Mr. Murphy had survived the journey to San Antonio, and that the doctor there was cautiously optimistic about his recovery. The Murphy family sent Wade and Willa a generous payment for Wade's help, along with a note of profound gratitude. The money was welcome, as they were saving everything they could for the baby's arrival, but more valuable was the confirmation that their skills, learned through practice and necessity, could make a real difference. Willa went into labor on a hot June afternoon. She had been hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she felt the first contraction, a tightening across her belly that made her pause. She waited, timing the next one, and when it came 10 minutes later, she knew it was time. She walked calmly back to the house, found Wade working on repairing a section of fence, and said simply, "The baby is coming." Wade dropped his tools immediately, his face going pale beneath his tan. "Now, are you sure? What do you need? Should I fetch someone?" "Fetch Mrs. Patterson," Willa instructed, proud of how steady her voice sounded despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. She promised to help when the time came, and then come back quickly. Wade practically flew into town, and by the time he returned with Mrs. Patterson, Willa's contractions were coming more regularly, about 7 minutes apart. Mrs. Patterson, who had assisted with numerous births over the years, took charge with a competent ease that Willa found immensely reassuring. "Now then, Mrs. Patterson said, helping Willa out of her dress and into a clean nightgown, "you just relax and let your body do what it needs to do. You have been helping others for so long. Now it is time to let someone help you." The labor lasted through the afternoon and into the evening. It was hard, painful work, and there were moments when Willa wondered if she had the strength to continue. But Wade stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement and love. And when Mrs. Patterson finally said, "One more push, dear, just one more," Willa gathered every bit of strength she had left and pushed. The baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy, and Willa collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but elated. Mrs. Patterson worked quickly, cleaning the baby and wrapping it in a soft blanket, then placed the small bundle in Willa's arms. "You have a son," Mrs. Patterson announced, beaming. "A beautiful, healthy baby boy." Willa looked down at her son, this tiny person she and Wade had created, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. He had a fuzzy cap of dark hair, Wade's hair, and when he opened his eyes they were a deep blue that might change color or might stay. He was perfect. "Hello, Billy," she whispered, touching his tiny hand. His fingers wrapped instinctively around hers, and she felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Wade knelt beside the bed, staring at his son with an expression of awe and wonder. "Can I hold him?" he asked hesitantly, as if afraid he might break something so small and precious. "Of course," Willa said, carefully transferring the baby into Wade's arms. Wade held Billy with surprising confidence, supporting his head naturally, and the baby settled against his father's chest as if he knew he was safe. "He is amazing," Wade said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are amazing, Willa. You just did the most incredible thing. You brought our son into the world." Mrs. Patterson stayed for a few more hours, making sure both Willa and the baby were stable, showing Willa how to nurse and tidying up. Before she left, she hugged them both and said, "You are going to be wonderful parents. That boy is lucky to have you." The first weeks with Billy were an adjustment. Willa was exhausted from the broken sleep, the constant demands of feeding and changing and soothing a newborn, but she was also happier than she had ever been. Wade was an attentive father, taking over whenever he could to give Willa a chance to rest, walking the floor with Billy when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint. They were a team, just as they had been in everything else, and they navigated the challenges of new parenthood together. Willa had to reduce the number of patients she saw during those early weeks, but she did not stop entirely. People still came with urgent needs, and she found that she could manage short consultations while Billy slept. Wade helped by screening patients, turning away those with minor ailments that could wait, and only bringing truly urgent cases to Willa's attention. One afternoon, when Billy was about 3 months old, Willa was sitting on the porch with her son in her arms when she saw a familiar shape circling overhead. Her heart leaped as she recognized the distinctive silhouette of a red-tailed hawk. The bird descended, landing on the fence post near the house, and Willa caught her breath. "Ranger," she called softly, though she knew it was impossible to be certain. The hawk cocked its head, studying her with amber eyes that seemed full of intelligence and recognition. Then it opened its beak and made a sharp, piercing cry that she remembered from all those months ago. Wade came out of the house, drawn by the sound, and stopped short when he saw the hawk. "Is that him?" "I think so," Willa said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I think he came back." They watched as Ranger preened his feathers, perfectly at ease on the fence post. His wing, the one that had been so badly injured, moved smoothly and naturally, showing no sign of the trauma it had endured. After a few minutes, the hawk spread his wings and took flight again, circling once over the house before flying off toward the creek. "He wanted you to see that he is all right," Wade said, slipping an arm around Willa's shoulders. "He wanted you to know that you succeeded." Over the next few years, Ranger returned periodically, never staying long but always making his presence known. Willa took his visits as a blessing, a reminder that healing was possible, that broken things could be made whole again with care and patience and love. Billy grew from a baby into a toddler, curious and energetic, with his father's storm-gray eyes and his mother's determination. Willa taught him to be gentle with animals, and Wade taught him about the ranch, about cattle and horses and the land. They had another child, a daughter they named Sarah as they had planned, and then 2 years after that, twin boys they named Thomas and John. Their small cabin became too crowded, and Wade built an addition, expanding it into a proper house with enough room for their growing family. Willa's reputation as a healer continued to spread. People came from farther and farther away, seeking her help with injuries and illnesses. She never turned anyone away if she could help, though she always insisted that serious cases be seen by a proper doctor, if at all possible. She taught her skills to others who were interested, creating a small network of people throughout the area who could provide basic medical care. Wade's ranch prospered as well. Their small herd of cattle grew, and he began breeding horses, a venture that proved very profitable. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their children and help their neighbors when needed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Willa by taking her back to the field where they had released Ranger all those years ago. It was the first time they had been there together since that morning, and Willa felt a rush of nostalgia as they stood in the tall grass, remembering. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked, taking her hand. "This life we have built, it is not easy and you work so hard." Willa turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "I have never regretted a single moment," she said firmly. "You and the children, this life, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You are my home, Wade Mitchell." "You are my home too," Wade replied, kissing her softly. "You healed me just as surely as you healed that hawk. I was lost and drifting, and you gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something lasting. You have a healing touch in more ways than one." As they stood together in the field, arms around each other, a red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing across the open land. Willa watched it fly strong and free and felt a profound sense of peace. She had nursed a wounded hawk until it could fly, and in doing so, she had found her own ability to soar. She had found love, family, purpose, and a future brighter than anything she could have imagined on that hot July day when she had carried a bleeding bird through the streets of Gonzales. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. Billy, their eldest, showed an early aptitude for working with animals, particularly horses. By the time he was 12, he could gentle a nervous colt with the same patience his mother had shown with Ranger, talking in a low, soothing voice until the animal trusted him. Wade worked with Billy in the evenings after the boy finished his chores, teaching him everything he knew about ranching, about reading the weather and the land, about the business side of selling cattle and horses. Sarah, their daughter, was different from her brother in temperament but equally determined. She followed Willa everywhere, watching intently as her mother treated patients, asking endless questions about herbs and remedies, about how to set a broken bone or stitch a wound. By the age of 10, Sarah could identify dozens of medicinal plants by sight and knew which were useful for fever, which for pain, which for infection. "She has your gift," Wade observed one evening as they watched Sarah carefully bandaging a neighbor child's scraped knee, her small face serious with concentration. "She has her own gifts," Willa corrected gently. "But yes, I think she might become a healer, if that is what she wants." The twins, Thomas and John, were whirlwinds of energy, always into some mischief or adventure. They were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and seeming to communicate without words. They were both fascinated by the wild things, spending hours exploring the creek that ran through the property, catching frogs and lizards and watching birds. Willa saw echoes of her younger self in their curiosity about the natural world. One spring, when the twins were 7 years old, a terrible drought gripped the region. The creek that usually flowed year-round dwindled to a trickle and then dried up entirely. The grass turned brown and brittle, and water had to be hauled from town for the livestock. Other ranchers lost cattle, unable to keep their herds fed and watered, and the community struggled under the hardship. Wade and Willa made the difficult decision to sell half their cattle, knowing that they could not sustain the full herd through the drought. It hurt to watch the animals go, each one representing years of work and investment, but it was necessary for survival. They used some of the money from the sale to dig a well on their property, something they had been putting off for years. It was expensive and the work was grueling, but when they finally struck water at 60 feet, the relief was overwhelming. Word spread quickly about the well, and neighbors began coming to ask if they could draw water for their own livestock and families. Wade and Willa never refused, even though it meant their own supplies were constantly strained. They shared what they had because it was the right thing to do, because they remembered what it was like to struggle alone, and because the community had supported them in their own times of need. The drought finally broke in late summer with a series of violent thunderstorms that dumped inches of rain in a matter of days. The creek flooded, overflowing its banks, and the parched ground drank in the water greedily. The grass began to grow again, turning from dead brown to vibrant green, and the world felt reborn. That fall, the community held a harvest celebration, grateful for the end of the drought and the promise of a better year ahead. It was held at the Murphy Ranch, which had the largest barn in the area, and everyone for miles around attended. There was food and music, dancing and laughter, and a sense of unity forged through shared hardship. Willa stood at the edge of the festivities, watching Wade dance with Sarah, while Billy showed off his rope tricks to a group of admiring children, and the twins chased each other around the barn. She felt a deep contentment, a sense of belonging that she had never felt in those lonely years after her parents died. This was her community now, these people who came to her for healing and whom she relied on in turn. This was her family, not just Wade and the children, but all these friends and neighbors who had become as close as blood. "Mrs. Mitchell," a hesitant voice said behind her, and Willa turned to find a young woman she did not recognize standing there, holding a baby. The woman looked exhausted and worried, her clothes dusty from travel. "Yes," Willa said, immediately shifting into her healer's mindset. "Can I help you? I heard about you from someone in town," the woman said quickly. "They said you are good with injuries and ailments, that you have a healing touch. My baby, she has been sick for days now, fever and coughing. I took her to a doctor in San Antonio, but he said there was nothing he could do, that I should just keep her comfortable and pray. But I cannot just wait for her to die. I cannot." Willa's heart clenched at the desperation in the woman's voice. She reached out to touch the baby's forehead and felt the unnatural heat of fever burning through the small body. The baby's breathing was labored, wheezing with each inhale. "Come with me," Willa said, making a quick decision. "Let me examine her properly, and we will see what we can do." She found Wade and told him she was leaving to help a patient, and he nodded understanding, knowing better than to try to stop her when someone needed help. Willa led the woman back to their ranch house, lighting lamps against the gathering darkness, and carefully examined the baby. The child was perhaps 6 months old, desperately ill with what Willa suspected was pneumonia. The doctor in San Antonio had been right that there was no cure, but Willa also knew that sometimes the body just needed support to fight off infection on its own. She prepared a poultice for the baby's chest to help loosen the congestion, a mixture of mustard, flour, and water wrapped in cloth. She made a tea from herbs that would help reduce the fever and support breathing. And she instructed the mother on how to keep the baby upright as much as possible to help drain the lungs, how to encourage her to nurse frequently for nourishment and fluids. "Stay here tonight," Willa said when she had done everything she could. "I want to monitor her closely. If she worsens, we may need to take more aggressive measures." The woman, whose name was Elizabeth, looked ready to cry with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Willa settled Elizabeth and the baby in the room that Sarah usually shared with the twins, sending the children to sleep in Billy's room for the night. Then she sat up with Elizabeth, checking on the baby every hour, changing the poultice, encouraging Elizabeth to keep nursing. Wade came home late from the celebration and found them there, taking in the situation with a single glance. "What can I do?" he asked simply. "Sleep," Willa said. "One of us should be rested in case tomorrow is difficult." But Wade did not sleep. He made coffee and kept it hot through the night, brought food that neither Willa nor Elizabeth could manage to eat, and took a turn holding the baby so Elizabeth could rest for a few hours. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the baby's fever finally began to drop. Her breathing eased, becoming less labored, and she nursed more strongly than she had in days. "I think she is improving," Willa said cautiously, afraid to hope too much. But as the morning progressed, the improvement continued. By noon, the baby was alert and even managed a small smile. Elizabeth cried, clutching her daughter close, and thanked Willa over and over. "How much do I owe you?" Elizabeth asked, reaching for a small purse. "I do not have much, but I will give you everything I have." "You owe me nothing," Willa said firmly. "Just take care of your daughter and yourself. That is payment enough." "But you saved her life," Elizabeth protested. "Then live it well," Willa replied. "Both of you, that is what I want." After Elizabeth left, promising to return in a few days so Willa could check on the baby's progress, Wade wrapped his arms around Willa from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "You are amazing," he murmured. "Do you know that? You saved that baby's life when a trained doctor gave up." "I just did what I could," Willa said, exhausted but satisfied. "I cannot save everyone, Wade. There have been people I could not help, people who died despite my best efforts. I always remember them." "Of course you do," Wade said gently. "Because you care. That is what makes you good at this. Not just the knowledge or the skill, but the caring." As more years passed, Billy grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, with a gift for working with horses that attracted buyers from as far away as Fort Worth. He took over more and more of the ranch's operations, allowing Wade to slow down slightly as he approached his mid-40s. Sarah, meanwhile, had become Willa's full apprentice, assisting with almost every patient and developing her own reputation as a skilled healer. The twins, now teenagers, were beginning to think about their own futures, both expressing interest in learning more about the business side of ranching. On a cool October evening when Willa was 40 years old, she and Wade sat together on their porch as they had done countless times over the years, watching the sun set. Their bodies were marked by time and hard work, Wade's hair graying at the temples and Willa's hands rough from years of labor, but the love between them had only deepened with the passing years. "You remember the day you found Ranger?" Wade asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Of course," Willa replied. "How could I forget? That day changed everything." "It brought us together," Wade agreed. "But I have been thinking, and I believe we would have found each other anyway. We were meant to be together, Willa. The hawk was just the catalyst." Willa considered this, turning it over in her mind. "Maybe," she allowed, "but I am still grateful for Ranger. He taught me that broken things can heal, that patience and care can work miracles. I carried that lesson into everything else in my life." As if summoned by the mention of his name, a red-tailed hawk appeared, circling high above their property. It was impossible to say for certain if it was the same bird Willa had healed so many years ago, but she liked to think it was, liked to imagine that Ranger remembered her as she remembered him. "You have got a healing touch," Wade said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago in that field. "You healed me, you healed our children, you have healed countless people throughout the years. But you know what the most miraculous thing you healed was?" "What?" Willa asked, curious. "The loneliness," Wade said simply. "Mine and yours. We were both so alone, both drifting through life without purpose or connection. And then we found each other, and suddenly everything made sense. You healed that emptiness inside me, Willa. You made me whole." Willa felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the raw honesty in Wade's words. "You healed me too," she said softly. "You gave me a home, a family, a reason to hope. You showed me what love looks like, what it feels like. I was just surviving before you came into my life. You taught me how to live." They sat together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, hands clasped, hearts united. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their family, Billy discussing plans for acquiring more breeding stock, Sarah reading aloud from a medical text Willa had ordered for her, the twins arguing good-naturedly about something inconsequential. These sounds were the music of their life, the proof that they had built something lasting and good. As the years continued to advance, Wade and Willa gradually stepped back from the hardest physical labor, trusting their children to take over. Billy married a young woman named Martha from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the far side of the property, adding to the family dynasty. Sarah never married, too dedicated to her healing work to want a husband and children, and Willa supported her decision completely, proud that her daughter was forging her own path. The twins eventually decided to start their own ranch, pooling their resources and purchasing land a few hours' ride to the north. It was hard to see them go, but Willa and Wade knew it was right that young people make their own way in the world. They had done the same thing, after all, and look how well it had turned out. Grandchildren arrived, Billy and Martha's brood of energetic youngsters who loved visiting their grandparents and hearing stories about the old days. Willa taught them the same things she had taught her own children, about kindness and patience, about healing and hard work. Wade taught them about ranching and honor, about keeping your word and treating others with respect. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Billy and Martha organized a surprise celebration, inviting everyone from miles around. The party was held at Wade and Willa's ranch, in the larger house that Wade had continued to expand over the years until it was sprawling and comfortable, with enough room to hold their entire extended family. There was food and music and dancing, just like that harvest celebration so many years ago, and Willa found herself surrounded by love. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had gone home and the family was sitting around the fire, Billy stood and cleared his throat. "I want to say something," he announced, and the room fell quiet. "We are gathered here to celebrate 30 years of marriage between my parents, but I think we are really celebrating something bigger than that. We are celebrating two people who built something from nothing, who created a home and a legacy through hard work and love. My mother has healed countless people over the years, and my father built a ranch that supports our entire family. But more than that, they showed us what a real partnership looks like, what love looks like when it is true and lasting." He paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. "When I was young, I once asked my mother what the most important thing she ever healed was. She told me it was a hawk with a broken wing, because that hawk led her to my father. And then she said that the second most important thing she healed was her own belief that she was meant to be alone. She said my father taught her that broken things can be made whole, that even when life seems hopeless, love can change everything." Billy raised his glass, and everyone followed suit. To Wade and Willa Mitchell, who taught us all about healing, about love, and about building a life worth living. May we all be so blessed. To Wade and Willa, the room chorused, and Willa felt tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude surrounding her. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Wade and Willa walked out to the porch one last time. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant against the black sky, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. 30 years, Wade mused, shaking his head. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean, Willa said, leaning against him. I remember that first day you walked into the general store like it was yesterday. I remember being so flustered by you, trying to stay professional while my heart was racing." Wade laughed softly. "I remember too. I took one look at you and knew my drifting days were over. I knew I had found what I had been searching for, even though I had not realized I was searching." "Do you think Ranger is still alive?" Willa asked suddenly, voicing a question she had wondered about many times over the years. "Maybe," Wade said. "Hawks can live a long time in the wild if they are smart and lucky, but even if he is not, his legacy lives on. He brought us together, and look at everything that came from that. Children, grandchildren, a life full of love and purpose. Not bad for one wounded bird." Willa smiled in the darkness. "Not bad at all." They stood together in the night, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of meaning and joy from the ashes of loss and loneliness. The hawk had been the beginning, but their love had been the foundation of everything that followed, strong and enduring and true. In the distance, a hawk's cry echoed across the land, wild and free, and Willa chose to believe it was Ranger, still flying after all these years, still whole and healthy because she had refused to give up on him. Just as Wade had refused to give up on her and she on him. As they walked back into the house, arms around each other, Willa reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. From a lonely orphan girl with nothing but her healing skills to sustain her, to a wife, mother, grandmother, and respected healer in the community. From despair to hope, from loneliness to love, all because she had found a wounded hawk and refused to let it die. "I love you, Wade Mitchell," she said as they prepared for bed, the comfortable intimacy of 3 decades of marriage making the words both casual and profound. "I love you too, Willa Mitchell," Wade replied, kissing her forehead. "And I thank God every day that you have got that healing touch, because you healed the most important thing of all. You healed my heart." The years continued their inexorable march. Wade and Willa grew older, their bodies slowing but their minds and spirits remaining sharp. They watched their grandchildren grow, some following in the family traditions of ranching and healing, others striking out on new paths. They weathered droughts and storms, economic hardships and personal losses, always together, always supporting each other. When Wade fell ill with a fever in his 60th year, Willa nursed him with the same tender care she had given Ranger all those decades ago. She never left his side, monitoring his temperature, forcing fluids, trying every remedy she knew. And just as with Ranger, her patient perseverance paid off. Wade recovered, though the illness left him weaker than before, and they both understood that their time was growing shorter. "I am not afraid," Wade told her one evening as they sat together, his hand clasped in hers. "I have lived a full life, a happy life, and whatever comes next, I know we will face it together just like we have faced everything else." "Together," Willa agreed, squeezing his hand. "Always together." But Wade recovered, and they had more good years. Years of watching their grandchildren marry and have children of their own, of celebrating holidays surrounded by family, of quiet evenings on the porch where they had spent so many hours over the decades. They were content, grateful for every additional day they were given. On a golden afternoon in late September, when Willa was 68 years old and Wade was 72, they walked out to the field where they had released Ranger so many years ago. It had become a tradition of sorts, visiting that place on their anniversary, remembering the beginning of their life together. They stood in the tall grass, older and slower but still hand in hand, still in love. The land stretched out around them, familiar and beloved, marked by the work of their hands and the labor of their hearts. "Do you have any regrets?" Wade asked, as he had asked so many times before over the years. "Not a single one," Willa replied, as she always did. "You." Only that I wish we had more time, Wade said honestly. But I suppose everyone wishes that when they are happy. A shadow passed over them, and they looked up to see a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. It was impossible, absolutely impossible that it could be Ranger after all these years, and yet Willa felt a surge of recognition, a sense of connection that transcended logic. The hawk descended, landing on a fence post nearby, and regarded them with amber eyes that seemed ancient and wise. For a long moment, the three of them remained frozen in a tableau, connected by something invisible but undeniable. Then the hawk spread its wings, magnificent and whole, and took flight, soaring up into the cloudless sky. Willa watched until the hawk disappeared from view, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, though she could not have said exactly what she was thanking the bird for surviving, for bringing Wade into her life, for reminding her that healing was possible, that broken things could be made whole, all of that, and more. Wade pulled her close, and they stood together as the sun moved across the sky, two souls who had found each other and built a life of love and meaning. The hawk was gone, flying free somewhere over the Texas landscape, but its gift remained. The healing touch that Willa had discovered in herself all those years ago had not just saved a wounded bird. It had saved her, and Wade, and in a way, it had saved everyone whose lives they had touched. As they walked slowly back to the ranch house, their children and grandchildren visible in the distance going about the business of the working ranch, Willa felt a profound sense of peace. Her life had been hard at times, marked by loss and struggle, but it had also been beautiful, filled with love and purpose, and the satisfaction of work well done. She had nursed a wounded hawk until it could fly, and a cowboy had told her she had a healing touch. From that simple beginning had grown everything else, an entire lifetime of joy and meaning. The hawk had healed and flown away, as it was meant to do. But the love between Willa and Wade had endured, strong and true through all the years, a testament to the power of compassion, patience, and two hearts finding their perfect match. That evening, surrounded by their family, Willa and Wade sat at the head of the long table Billy had built, holding hands beneath the tablecloth like young lovers. The house was full of noise and laughter, multiple conversations happening at once, children running and playing, babies crying and being soothed. This was their legacy, this vibrant, thriving family, and every face around the table existed because Willa had found a wounded hawk and Wade had returned a lost locket. "What are you thinking about?" Wade murmured, leaning close so only she could hear. "I am thinking that we did well," Willa replied, her eyes shining. "We built something good, you and I, something that will last long after we are gone." "We did indeed," Wade agreed, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "We healed each other, and in doing so, we created all of this. Not bad for a cowboy and a woman with a healing touch." Willa laughed, the sound bright and free, and in that moment, she felt the same surge of joy she had experienced watching Ranger fly for the first time, the same certainty that everything was exactly as it should be. They had taken their broken pieces and made each other whole. They had built a life from nothing, guided by love and sustained by hard work. And now, in the autumn of their years, they could look back with satisfaction and forward with hope, knowing that their story would continue in their children and grandchildren, in the land they had nurtured and the community they had served. The hawk had flown, but its legacy remained. And Wade and Willa Mitchell, who had found each other through a wounded bird and a shared loneliness, lived out the rest of their days in the home they had built together, surrounded by love, content in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply, and that their story, which had begun with a healing touch, would echo through generations to come as a testament to the transforming power of compassion and the enduring strength of true love.